Max Verstappen won the 2023 Formula One Monaco Grand Prix and made my prediction of Charles Leclerc winning the race look amateurish at best. Yeah, I predicted Charles Leclerc to win, and yeah, it never looked like happening. But yes, overall, the Monaco Grand Prix weekend was fun. We had a fantastic qualifying session and watching four different cars stick it on provisional pole position. What more can you ask for? That was sensational qualifying. Even the race, it was fun. Obviously, Max dominated, but he had to overcome quite a few challenges. The rain made things interesting, and overall, compared to quite a few races this season, Monaco was quite eventful and, to be honest, a fun watch and something I honestly did not expect heading into the weekend. So, yes, in this video, we're not here to talk about all that. We are here to specifically talk about the drivers and we are here to rate them. So, in this video, what we are going to do is rate the drivers on how they fared in the 2023 F1 Monaco Grand Prix. Now, without further ado, let's get straight to it. Let's jump straight to the driver ratings for the 2023 Formula One Monaco Grand Prix. Let's start with Red Bull, and first of all, let's take a look at Max Verstappen. Now, what can I even say? The drive this time around, I think it's fair to say that this was one of the weekends where we can firmly say that the driver made the difference. If Max Verstappen had not done a completely clean lap in qualifying, in the final stages, he would have been P4. And if he started the race in P4, was he going to win? Arguably not. He was not going to win the race. And that is where ultimately we have to stand up and applaud the kind of performance that he put together. Why? Because it was crunch time, and it was at times like these where the true driver and the true talent shines through. In case of Max, it did. It was a stunning qualifying lap, and arguably he won the race through that qualifying lap, or at least he set things up with the help of that lap. Now, even after the qualifying, even in the race, he had quite a few challenges. First of all, he had to extend his stint because Alonso was on hard tires. Then even managing the car through the wet weather and doing it so flawlessly, you have to applaud that. And arguably one of the better drive of the season from Max, because let's be fair, he had a lot of competition this weekend and he was still able to finish on top. In the end, now he looks at a 39-point advantage in the championship. And yeah, when we talk about the title battle, let's be fair, it hardly exists. Now coming to the driver rating, to be honest, I cannot even take a point away from the kind of weekend that he had. In my view, he gets a 10 out of 10 for the Monaco Grand Prix. Now talking about Sergio Perez, and I really don't have much to say. It was a pathetic display from him all round. You cannot crash your car in Monaco, especially in your very first lap in qualifying. You do that, you ruin your weekend. That's what happened. Then even in the race, he was pushing too much. He was under pressure. But at the end of the day, if you're going to finish a race where you are 2 laps behind your teammate, that's not a good look. And that is something that Perez, arguably the last 2 races have shattered any confidence that Sergio had gained in the early part of the season. Right now, he's looking at a 39-point deficit, and I really don't see him making any substantial progress when it comes to cutting down in that lead. Unless, of course, Max ends up having another reliability issue or something like that. So yeah, overall, a poor weekend, arguably one of the worst weekends Perez has had in a long time. And yeah, when it comes to rating his weekend, I give him 2 out of 10. Now, moving to Ferrari, first of all, let's take a look at Charles Leclerc. Now, when we talk about Charles Leclerc, that qualifying lap was arguably as good as what Alonso or Max did. Again, you have to admit, Leclerc in qualifying is phenomenal. There's no doubt about it. But yes, once again, like something that has been happening since 2018 or 2017, since Leclerc has come to Monaco, once again, the Monaco curse struck. He was in the tunnel and he blocked Lando Norris and got a 3-place grid penalty. That penalty meant the race was a bit of a procession for him. He controlled things and ultimately reached the checkered flag, didn't really gain many places or anything like that. But yes, if he'd started the race in P3, a podium was there, and that would have been a strong result for him. So yeah, overall a strong weekend. He was arguably compromised by the poor grid slot. And yeah, if I have to give a rating for the entire weekend, I'll give him an 8.5 out of 10. Now coming to Carlos Sainz, and to be honest, I was a bit disappointed because FP1, FP2, I had an inkling that Sainz was arguably the faster Ferrari driver around Monaco this weekend. It didn't materialize because Charles pulled something stunning out of the hat in that final lap in Q3. Sainz was not able to replicate, and if he would be starting the race in P5 if Charles did not have the penalty. Again, penalty happened. Sainz started the race in P4. And even there, he was a bit fidgety. I really don't know why. Maybe it was because Ocon holding him up left him frustrated. Maybe that played a role. Again, the damage to the front wing, it was unnecessary. He tried a move that was not non-existent in every way possible. And then later in the race, him shouting on the team radio that he didn't care about Lewis and everything. To be honest, if you go back and take a look, Ferrari made the right call. Again, the final call of staying out on slicks for one extra lap, it costed him. It didn't cost Leclerc as much. But yes, when you take all these things into consideration and, try to put the pieces together, you see that arguably it was not a good weekend from Sainz, and there was potential of him being one of the front runners this weekend, but he wasn't able to deliver in any which way. So yeah, in my view, he gets a rating of 7 out of 10. Now moving to Mercedes, let's take a look at Lewis Hamilton. Now, in my view, I was very impressed with how he progressed through the qualifying because, to be honest, he was not comfortable. He just scraped through in Q1, he just scraped through in Q2, but when it came to Q3, he was able to outqualify George Russell. And again, that is an impressive feat. Then in the race, he kept his nose clean, he basically did everything flawlessly and extracted whatever was possible. And yeah, at the end of the day, ended up beating George Russell and he did that basically by not making any mistakes while Russell did. So yeah, overall, if I have to give him a rating, I give him a rating of 8.5 out of 10. Now talking about George Russell, and in my view, Russell disappointed this weekend. He had the speed to secure a much better result. He was in a position to secure a podium. He failed in both of them. He made a mistake in qualifying. He made a mistake in race. And the fact that he did not finish on the podium is entirely up to him. Overall, a very average weekend, and he gets a rating of 7 out of 10. Now moving to Alpine, and first of all at Alpine, let's take a look at Esteban Ocon. Well, what can I say? Arguably the driver of the weekend this time around. His qualifying lap was stunning, and I think Alpine missed a trick. He finished his lap when there were 3 minutes left on the clock. That's a lot of time, and that's a lot of track evolution. Just imagine if he had done the lap in the dying stages of qualifying. You can imagine maybe him nicking a 10th or 2, maybe him starting on the front row. But yes, even then, regardless, keeping all those things aside, very impressive weekend. His race management was very impressive because I don't think many people noticed that Ocon might have held up the entire field behind him, but when he was about to pit, his S1 was purple, his S2 was almost the fastest, and then he jumped into the pits and came out in front of both Sainz as well as Lewis. He did that by keeping his tires alive and by keeping enough life in them that he can extract the pace when he needed it. Very impressive in every which way. Also, he had a lot of these challenges to overcome. First of all, the pit stop was not the fastest. He overcame that. Then even when the rain came for the first time, he was not in the podium finishing position, but then Russell spun and it gave him the spot. Throughout the weekend, he did not make a single mistake, and arguably in my view, he was a driver of the weekend. So yes, talking about giving a driver rating, he gets a 10 out of 10 for this weekend. Now talking about Pierre Gasly, and solid weekend from his side as well. He did a good job, but once Ocon truly kicked on, Gasly was not able to keep up. The final lap between the two, the qualifying lap, there was a gap of around 0.3 of a second, and that is huge in the modern age. And that made the difference when it came to finishing on the podium or finishing P7, P8. Arguably still a strong weekend from Gasly, but he got overshadowed by Ocon this time around. So yeah, coming to the driver ratings, he gets a rating of 7 out of 10 for Monaco. Now talking about McLaren, and first of all at McLaren, let's talk about Lando Norris. Now Lando had sensational pace, there's no doubt about it. In my view, when it came to performance, he could have challenged Mercedes in qualifying at least, but he made a mistake. He hit the wall and that compromised his race, in my view. Qualifying P10 was not optimal. He could have been higher, but it is what it is. He executed a pretty strong race, and his overtakes on both Piastri as well as Tsunoda were very impressive. His pace on the wets was spectacular for both McLaren drivers, to be honest. Overall, yeah, he scores points, but maybe a bit more was on the table. So yeah, in my view, he gets a rating of 7 out of 10, primarily because of the mistake he made in qualifying. Now coming to Oscar Piastri, and to be honest, my views about his weekend and my driver rating might not concur to an extent. The reason behind it, I'll get to it later. Now, talking about Oscar, he impressed me a lot this weekend. The reason he impressed me a lot this weekend was because the gap between him and Norris was negligible. It was less than a tenth in qualifying. And then, even in the race, he was able to keep up with Norris in a very impressive manner. Compare that to how Norris dominated Ricciardo last season, you see the difference. In my view, Oscar is already a proven entity. He still has some ways to go, and that is why, in my view, he gets the rating of 6.5. A 6.5 rating primarily because at the end of the day, his teammate gets a rating of 7, and Oscar was just a tad worse than whatever Norris did this weekend. Especially if you take into consideration the fact that Norris overtook Oscar, especially in Monaco. You don't let that happen. So yeah, he gets a rating of 6.5, but I'm very impressed, and I'll be eager to keep an eye on what he does next. Now moving to the Alfa Romeo pair, first of all, let's talk about Valtteri Bottas. Now talking about Bottas again, it was a bit of an anonymous weekend. Not much to speak of, to be honest. The car, it didn't have the pace to score points, but Bottas was there and thereabouts. Decent race, decent qualifying, but nothing flashy and nothing emulating the kind of form that he showed in FP3, FP2, where he was in the top 10. So yeah, maybe a bit of disappointment. Maybe he could have done better. And overall, he gets a rating of 6 out of 10 from me. Now talking about Zhou Guanyu, and I think he's back to being a driver that produces a performance that is slightly lesser than what his teammate is able to. Decent qualifying, decent race, not on the level of Bottas, and I don't know. Alfa Romeo needs to find a better driver instead of Zhou, and someone who is able to extract more performance out of the car. In my view, for the Monaco Grand Prix, he gets a rating of 5 out of 10. Now moving to Aston Martin, and first of all, let's take a look at Fernando Alonso. Now talking about Fernando Alonso, well, that qualifying lap was spectacular. There's no doubt about it. Arguably, it's not only that particular lap where Fernando Alonso was on the edge. It was the entire qualifying session, even the FP2, FP3, where Alonso just found that rhythm and he kept improving lap by lap. And you could see him hustling the car in a way that his teammate was not able to. So yeah, the qualifying session was stunning from him. Missing out on pole position will hurt a bit, to be honest, for sure. Again, moving to the race, he optimized everything. He also did a very impressive job that he did not crash out, especially when the track was as wet as it was at that point in time and he was on slick tires. Maybe he missed a win. I mean, whatever I've seen, it does appear that he might have, but these things happen, to be honest. Overall, again, a flawless weekend, and he gets a rating of 10 out of 10 from me for Monaco. Now talking about Lance Stroll, and yeah, it was a overall pathetic weekend from Lance Stroll once again. I don't even know what to talk about it because he was roughly around half a second behind Alonso in FP1 and FP2. In FP3, Alonso was not able to put a lap together. Even if you keep that aside, Stroll not scoring points in Monaco or even in Miami the race prior, it just shows that he's a dead weight at Aston Martin, to be honest. He's bringing the team down, he's bringing the morale down, and Aston Martin is slowly becoming a single driver team. You look at the points tally of both these drivers. You have Stroll at 27, you have Alonso at 93. That's almost 4 times the points. Look, we know that Stroll is not going to leave that team. We all know that. At the end of the day, it's his team. But there is going to come a point when he is going to become the most hated driver in Formula 1. I can see that happening. He has a talent, but with Alonso and the other car, he's going to get exposed every weekend, just like he's done in the last 2 races. So yeah, if I have to give a rating, he gets a rating of 2 out of 10 for the Monaco Grand Prix. Now let's talk about Haas, and first of all, let's talk about Kevin Magnussen. Well, when we talk about Kevin Magnussen's weekend in Monaco, the one thing that stands out is a smooth overtake on Logan Sargent. That overtake was stunning. Okay, I agree, Logan was struggling with tires, but that overtake was beautiful. Now, other than that, there wasn't much to speak of in the entire weekend, to be honest. The car was not up to the mark. Magnussen tried to make things happen, couldn't make much happen, to be honest. And at the end of the day, didn't really score any points and had to, call it a day. So yeah, not that great a weekend, even though that overtake was sick. That was beautiful. So yes, when it comes to rating Magnussen's weekend, I give him a rating of 5 out of 10. Nothing spectacular, to be honest, but yeah, it is what it is sometimes when you're driving a Haas. Now moving on from Magnussen to Hulkenberg. It was more or less the same story, to be honest. Hulkenberg was actually slower than Magnussen, although it was a gap of just about a hundreds in qualifying, which was a bit of a surprise. But yes, even then, he was a bit too exuberant in the early part of the race, tried to make moves that were really not there, especially in Monaco. But yes, they took their chances. To be honest, both Haas drivers, they took their chances. There wasn't really much they could do. And yeah, no points. And in an eventful race, there wasn't really much the both of them could do, to be honest. But it is what it is. Sometimes that's how the weekends turn out. And even in case of Hulkenberg, I give him a rating of 5 out of 10. Now moving to AlphaTauri. And for AlphaTauri, first of all, let's talk about Yuki Tsunoda. Now, for Yuki, once again, another brilliant weekend. In terms of qualifying, arguably he extracted the best possible result. He was arguably the best of the rest when it comes to the midfield teams. A P9 in qualifying is very impressive. Even in the race, he didn't really do anything wrong. Was again the best of the rest, easily keeping the McLarens at bay. Again, something happened when it came to the rain. It wasn't the perfect weekend, to be honest, in terms of that. And yes, because of what happened in the later stages of the race in the wet, Yuki does lose a couple of points. Overall, if I have to give a rating, again, very consistent, hardly making too many mistakes, an 8 out of 10 from my side for Yuki Tsunoda at the Monaco Grand Prix. Now talking about Nick De Vries, and to be honest, one of the better weekends from De Vries. He was more or less close to Yuki, not at his pace, but still there were a couple of tenths of a gap between the two. Now, yes, he did not crash. He kept things simple, and there weren't really instances of him crashing the car in the barriers, nothing like that. Having said that, he was still at one stage in the dry, almost 40 seconds behind Yuki. Now, that is something that is unacceptable, to be honest. You can't be doing something like that. So, yes, there is still a gap that he needs to bridge. But overall, still, I'll say a positive weekend. In terms of driver ratings, he gets a 6 out of 10 for the Monaco Grand Prix. Now, let's talk about Williams. And first of all, let's talk about Alex Albon. Well, in my view, a very typical Alex Albon weekend. He maximized whatever he could. The car was not yielding too much of lap time, to be honest. There wasn't really much he could do. So yeah, he kept things steady. A decent weekend once again, but the spark is missing. Last season we used to see Albon score a point or two, but this time around, the consistency and the results are not really there. Maybe it's the car, maybe it's the driver, but overall, still everything's a bit average, to be honest. So yeah, in terms of rating for Monaco, he gets a rating of 7 out of 10. Now talking about Logan Sargent. Well, Logan's career, even his junior career and now in Formula One, there are a few things that have remained the same. The first is the fact that he has immense potential. Then he has pretty impressive one lap speed. That is something that has been there with him even in junior categories, where he outqualified both Liam Lawson and Oscar Piastri as teammates. However, there's one thing that has also continued into his Formula One career, and that is his inability to put everything together. Logan's peaks could match the best of drivers on the Formula One grid. To be honest, that is how well he can do. But he's shown an inability to put everything together, and Monaco was a prime example. There were moments in FP1 and FP2 where Logan was arguably the faster Williams driver. But when push came to shove, Albon pulled out such a significant advantage that Logan couldn't keep up. And then the crashes and everything, it was another pretty average weekend from Logan. And if I have to give a rating, it's 4 out of 10 for the Monaco Grand Prix. Okay, so now since we've gone through the entire grid, let's take a look at the driver ratings for the Monaco Grand Prix. Now, as you can see, this time around, maybe I've been a bit too generous because Max, Alonso, and Ocon, all of them have got a 10 in terms of the driver ratings, and this is arguably me being too generous. Or maybe, to be honest, in my view, they had pretty much a flawless weekend. They couldn't have done anything more. Maybe Alonso could have won, but that is still something down to the strategy and maybe a bit of luck. But other than that, I really can't fault anything from all three of them. So yeah, after this, let's take a look at the cumulative rating, because this is the most interesting part for me. Okay, now this is something that I find really interesting, to be honest. Well, Max is at the top. I don't think there are too many surprises. Alonso at P2, again, not much of a surprise. Russell at P3 is still understandable because he tends to be very consistent over the season and he has been doing that. A couple of races have been a bit average, to be honest. But what is surprising is, well, if I ask you guys a question, who would have expected Yuki Tsunoda to be the fourth best driver in terms of rankings after 6 races into the season? I don't think anyone would have even predicted something like this. But the fact is that Yuki has remained very, very consistent, and you can see it in the results. Then even Esteban Ocon at P5, arguably his standings are somewhat skewed because of the very impressive weekend he had in Monaco. He's had a couple of not that great results, to be honest. Now Lewis in 6th is not a surprise. He should be in the top 8, the front runners, Leclerc and Norris. However, one thing that should surprise everyone is the fact that while Yuki has not made mistakes, we've seen Norris make 2 mistakes this season already in the first 6 races. This is something that we don't tend to see often. Even Charles Leclerc has made quite a few. So yeah, that is something that does stand out. Now if we look at the bottom, and I think this is arguably in my view the danger zone in terms of drivers that whose seat might be at risk. Now Carlos Sainz is at 15. I'm not going to say that his seat is at risk, but even though he has shown improvement, the results are not really there. He couldn't put everything together in Monaco as well, if we are completely honest. Then after Sainz, we have Stroll in 17th. That is poor. Then Sargent in 19th and Nick De Vries in 20. So these drivers really need to pull up their socks, because if they're unable to improve, it might not be a surprise if we see De Vries losing his seat, Joe Guan Yu losing his seat, and maybe if Logan does not improve and continues to have this kind of a run, maybe his seat might also be in danger. So yeah, this is where we stand after the first 6 races. What do you guys think? Are the ratings appropriate, or are there some rankings where you don't agree? Do let me know in the comment section. Thanks for watching and see you next time.